Hello everybody, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. Today is 19th December 2024 and today we have some important articles for the discussion and we'll discuss all these important articles, right? So we have selected few articles from both Hindu and Indian Express newspapers. So one by one we'll try to discuss them in a very detailed manner, and the first article with which we are going to start this discussion is how wealth tax boost Indian economy. Now, we all knew that in India there are inequalities, right? So income inequalities, regional inequalities, and in fact these inequalities have been further rising. So therefore, in this context, a lot of economists and other scholars have been suggesting that in order to bridge, or in order to reduce the income inequalities in India, it is very important that we need to bring in progressive taxation or wealth tax. Now, what is a progressive taxation? Progressive taxation essentially means that the tax rate increases with increasing income, and that is progressive taxation. So wealth tax is also same. So whoever owns wealth, so they will be taxed. So thereby what happens is that this wealth tax will further widen the tax base of the government, and that helps the government to finance the social sector activities, and government can also invest in areas like infrastructure creation and all. So that is what the author has been talking about with respect to wealth tax, and how this wealth tax would have a multiplier effect and how it would further impact Indian economy. Now, first we'll try to understand a brief context of it, then we'll go into the discussion. So recently there was an article written by Piketty. Okay, so he has written an article with respect to inequality. So in this article he discussed about the issues related to inequality, demand in the economy, as well as taxation in India. So he has discussed all these different dynamics of the Indian economy, particularly questioning the effectiveness of wealth taxation in India or progressive taxation in India. Because if India imposes wealth tax on the wealth which is being earned by the top 10 or top 20 wealthiest individuals, so that to some extent helps bridge this inequalities, this income inequalities. So however, in India, income inequalities are further widening or deepening, and because of that reason he questioned the effectiveness of wealth taxation. So however, while agreeing with the concern over low tax revenue and its impact on social sector, now understand that in India tax to GDP ratio is very low, right? So it is around 16 to 17%. For example, if you take whole GDP of India, and how much tax has been, how much proportion that tax has in whole GDP, so that is tax to GDP ratio. So in fact we have a low tax revenue in India. So direct taxes are very less, and indirect taxes are also very less. So keeping in mind the entire economy of India, because we are the 5th largest economy in terms of GDP and 3rd largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity. So despite such a huge scale, our economy's GDP, tax to GDP ratio is still less, right? So we have been getting low tax revenue, and it has also impacting the social sector spending as well. See, understand one thing, that how government can spend on social sector activities such as healthcare or education, if government have the money with it, right? So that money can be raised through taxation. However, in India we have a very narrow tax base. There is a need to widen the tax base so that the government will have more finances to invest in areas like education and healthcare, and that would result in the human resources development, or that would even result in the economic growth and economic development as well, right? So however, some scholars have been arguing that if we impose wealth tax on wealthy individuals, so that may be counterproductive. So that counterproductive in the sense that could incentivize or disincentivize the people who have been earning a lot of money, that they may get the feeling that okay, we have been earning a lot of money, despite then the government has been imposing, or the government has been taking away whatever we have been earning in the form of taxation, right? So some argues that wealth taxation could be disruptive and even ineffective as well because of these reasons. So however, it is being suggested that the broadening of the tax base, now I've already told you that in India we have a narrow tax base, but if we broaden the tax base through reforms, so if we bring in more and more reforms and we widen or broaden our tax base, so that could have the potential of generating more and more revenues for the government, and government can also invest that money in productive areas. However, as I have already told you, that India's tax to GDP ratio is just 17%, right? So it is tax to GDP ratio is just 17%. So however, direct taxes have been contributing just 7% of the total out of this tax. So therefore, it is far lesser than the global standards. At the global level, the tax to GDP ratio of different countries is way above than the 30%. But in India, it is still very less. 17% is very less, and that is a cause of concern. And that has been, that has been stressing on the need to widen the tax base of India. Right? So when we widen the tax base, generally what happens is that government would have more money with it, and that money can be used to finance infrastructure investment or public investment, and spending on healthcare, education, and in other social aspects as well. So what happens is that that could help reducing or alleviating poverty, better healthcare, better education, right? So to some extent it helps bridging this income gap between wealthy individuals and poor individuals. But in India, the economic inequalities have been further widening. So therefore there is a need to ensure equality in terms of income, and equality of different regions, and equality in terms of wealth as well. So that is very, very important for us, and that's why the economists and scholars have been suggesting that there is a need for progressive taxation or a wealth taxation on the wealthier individuals. So that would ensure distribution of wealth. Okay, so that would result in the better distribution of wealth. So better distribution of wealth, what happens? So it would result in the equality, or equitable societies in terms of income, in terms of regions. So that's why scholars have been suggesting that there is a need for a wealth tax. And in fact, we all knew that when we talk about certain social sectors, right? So there are number of social sectors. Okay, so what are those social sectors? That investment in those social sectors is very important. First is education, healthcare, skill development. Okay, skill development. So all these are different social sectors. In these social sectors, government spending is less than the global standard. So one thing that you need to understand, government spending in these different sectors is less than the global standard. Government has not been investing the desired amount of money in these social sectors, and because of that reason, still we are not able to ensure universal health coverage. Still the dropout rate is very high. Still there is a prevalence of child labor, and still there is very less enrollment ratio. There is no proper infrastructure in schools, so we are not able to provide the best education. So that is required, that we need to provide for any country, right? So all these reasons over a period of time leads to low productivity, weak demand, and even sluggish growth, right? So it has been causing all these different problems, right? So we all knew that, for example, if there is no proper education, so that would over a period of time leads to a lot of issues such as learning outcomes would get impacted, low productivity, and that would further weaken the demand, and even that would lead to the sluggish growth as well. So however, if you take into account the data of inequalities in India, so top 1% of Indians, earn, or they account for 22% of the total national income. So if we take into account the total national income, so top 1% have been accounting for 22% of the national income, and 5% likely earn, so top 5% likely earn more than 40%. So don't you think that this data has been revealing us that there are extremely high levels of inequalities existing in India? And generally what happens with the wealth tax or progressive taxation, these inequalities can be brought down, or tax base can be further widened. So for example, in India there's a problem of black money as well. Now black money is generally unaccounted money, and black money on which taxes are not being paid. So if black income generation by the people who are in the wealthy category, so or we can say that the wealthiest people, so they also have black money with them. So if we could reduce the black money, so more tax revenue could be collected. Okay, so if we prevent wealthy individuals holding black money, so we could further widen our tax revenue. So therefore that could be further collected, and that contributing to the GDP. So thereby tax to GDP ratio can be substantially increased by this move. However, it would also broaden the tax base, and it would also help tackling inequality, right? So it essentially means taxing the rich to finance the poor, because there are inequalities, and inequalities are not good for any country and any economy in the long term. And in fact, a lot of scholars and experts are also criticizing the Indian government that there have been further widening inequalities, but government is not doing anything. However, there were several reforms within the taxation, right? So in the area of taxation, there are a lot of reforms. Only 6.5% of India's population are taxpayers. So don't you think that in whole population of India, only 6.5% are the taxpayers? For example, take into account India's population is 1,000. Imagine, right? So this is just an imaginary number. If India's population is 1,000, so only 65 individuals are the taxpayers, right? So only 65 individuals are taxpayers out of 1,000. So just 6.5% of Indians are taxpayers, and that too within 6.5%, a large number of people pay a very less amount of the taxes, because they are in that bracket of paying less number of taxes. So this has resulted in a narrow tax base, right? So this has resulted in narrow tax base for India. So narrow tax base in the sense that the government has the obligations of spending the money in different areas. For example, we need to talk about the capital expenditure, then revenue expenditure also, right? So if you look at the annual financial statement or the budget that is introduced in the parliament, so there are two different types of expenditure: capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. So if we have a lesser amount of money with the government, or the revenue base or tax base is very narrow, then the government will not have adequate money to meet the social welfare obligations, and government cannot invest in the infrastructure. So that is very, very important for any country. So government generally, what the government will do, government will borrow money, so that will further result in increasing fiscal deficit on the part of the government. So these are all the problems that an economy faces whenever there are higher inequalities and a narrow tax base and all. So wealth tax is generally seen as a viable option. Now, in this context, we have discussed all these challenges, and in this backdrop, as I have already told you, that experts have been suggesting that the government should introduce wealth tax, right? So if government introduces wealth tax, so it would result in distributive justice, right? So it will result in distributive justice. And the other thing that we need to remember here is that the directive principles of state policy also talked about the responsibility of the state to minimize income inequalities, wealth inequalities, and that is very important, and that is also very closely aligned with the Gandhi's idea of trusteeship model as well, right? So wealth tax in this context is a viable option for rising revenue. However, so with the digital records and proper political will, taxing wealth can be more efficiently implemented compared to past failures due to loopholes. So there are a lot of loopholes which are existing in the taxation system previously, and there are a lot of failures also, and in fact there's also lack of political will with respect to wealth taxation, because political will is very important, right? So political will is very important. So the politicians should not act as per the whims and fancies of the wealthy individuals, rather the politicians should look into the inequalities in India, and the politician should also work for the larger social good or social welfare of the Indian society. So that is very important here. But because lack of political will, so there is no proper decision with respect to wealth tax, and that is further leading to the widening of the inequalities in India. And in fact, so as experts have been suggesting that if the government brings in wealth tax, so that could further reduce inflated asset prices, right? So inflated asset prices in the sense that imagine that you own a property, right? So you own a property, and as of now there is no wealth tax on this property. So since there is no wealth tax on this property prices are very high because of a huge demand. So property prices are very high. Now imagine that tomorrow government imposed wealth tax on this property. So since this property is taxable, the demand will reduce. The demand for the property will reduce because now the government has been imposing wealth tax, right? So wealth tax could reduce the inflated asset prices, and that would lead to the more realistic return on the investments, right? So anybody can invest on the property, right? So because the asset prices, the inflated asset prices could reduce, and over a period of time that would result in a realistic return, right? So not less return, not a very high return, but a realistic return can be a possibility. For the one example is also given by the author. The example is that wealth tax on large corporations such as Reliance Industries. So for example, if government imposes wealth tax on Reliance industry, generally what happen, so that could result in the lower share prices. Okay, so because if government imposes wealth tax, so demand would reduce, and that would lead to capital shift towards more productive investments and even boost the economy as well. So therefore the wealth tax is being suggested. However, there are challenges also. If government comes up with the wealth tax and government taxing the property and the companies of wealthy individuals, there are some challenges also, right? So we'll talk about those challenges as well. So challenges including capital flight. So capital flight in the sense that, as we have discussed, that FDI and foreign portfolio investments are two different types of foreign investments. And foreign portfolio investors generally invest in Indian share market. So they invest in Indian share market, government bonds, and in all these different instruments. So whenever government imposes wealth tax on different companies, so it would even lead to the flight of capital and currency depreciation. So when investors withdrawing their investments from the Indian economy, Indian companies, so over a period of time it will even lead to the rupee depreciation and a balance of payment issues as well. Now what happens with the balance of payment issues? With the balance of payment issues, we will have a lesser amount of forex reserves with us, so we may not be able to finance our imports as well if the balance of payments further declines over a period of time. So there are some challenges also, but we need to bring in some measures for the temporary, to prevent the capital flight out of Indian economy temporarily. So however, in the long term, it will benefit the wealth tax. Wealth tax would benefit the whole economy. It would benefit the social sector. It would minimize the inequalities. It would result in the social welfare. The governments can also take up the social welfare functions as well, right? So wealth tax in the long term would result in the higher tax collections for the government, which could fund a greater investments in public goods and even social sectors. So there are a lot of such benefits and risks also involved, but there is a need for the political will, and with the political will we could overcome these challenges. We could bring in wealth tax in the long term, because that could further widen India's tax basket, and that would further enhance the efficiency of the government to finance the welfare programs and even invest in the social sector such as education and healthcare. So this is what the author has been suggesting here. And in fact, the author has also been stressing on the need for the political will in order to bring in wealth tax. So there is a need for the political will on the part of the politicians. So no doubt wealth tax is feasible for the Indian economy, and wealth tax would also result in significantly a high amount of taxes, and that would further widen tax base as well. So however, there are a lot of political and economic roadblocks to the wealth taxation. There will be a lot of pressure, lot of lobbying from the wealthy individuals on the government. So that has previously hindered the introduction of wealth tax or any such progressive taxation measures. However, it is very, very important for India and Indian economy that we should overcome all these different barriers. So that would be very critical to ensure wealth tax, to ensure that wealth tax can be a tool for improving social sector investment as well as reducing inequality. So I hope you knew how imposing wealth tax, widening government's tax base, increasing tax to GDP ratio would help finance the social sector by government's investments, and also reduces inequality by ensuring what is called as distributive justice. And in fact, if the wealth tax structured effectively, and if it is structured as efficiently as possible, so this wealth tax could contribute to reducing economic inequalities, right? So I have been emphasizing this again. So wealth taxation would result in distributive justice. Distributive justice would result in reducing economic inequalities, and it would generate more funds for the public investment in education, healthcare and infrastructure. And that's why experts have been suggesting the government that government should impose wealth taxation on wealthy individuals. And even Oxfam survey has rightly revealed that there has been increasing income inequalities among different social groups. So that's why it is very important for us that the government should bring in wealth tax. So a well implemented wealth tax would also reduce the black money, because black money is also another major problem that the Indian economy has been facing, right? So a well implemented, a well planned wealth taxation that could substantially reduce black money by addressing illegal wealth generation, so that could further increase the direct tax collections. So remember that in India, the direct tax collections are also very low. So therefore, in this context, it is very important that we need to increase the direct tax collections as well. So overall, this could create a virtuous cycle where a tax system could becomes more effective and inequality is addressed over a period of time. So ultimately, we need to address economic inequalities, income inequalities. So those inequalities can be addressed by wealth taxation and all these taxation reforms, and that would also further widen government's tax base as well. This is what the author has been suggesting, right? So we'll discuss the next topic. So the next article is so next article is, recently the central government has taken a decision that a protected area permit, a protected area regime has been implemented in 3 different states: Manipur, Mizoram and Nagaland. Now in this topic, we'll understand what is this protected area regime and why the center has implemented this protected area regime in these 3 different states, right? So when we talk about this, we all knew that northeastern part of India is ethnically sensitive region. Okay, so it is ethnically sensitive region. And apart from that, the northeastern part of India also facing the problem of illegal immigration, particularly from Bangladesh and Myanmar. So because of illegal immigration, northeastern part of India is ethnically sensitive and it is also a very volatile region. So since it is a very volatile, there's often law and order problem, and even the incidents of violence very frequently takes place in different parts of the northeast India. So mostly Manipur, Mizoram and Nagaland are very volatile regions. So in order to ensure law and order, in order to curb illegal immigration of foreigners into these different states, the Home Ministry has decided to reimpose protected area permit in these 3 different states. So remember, Manipur, Mizoram and Nagaland shares a long boundary with Myanmar, and Myanmar is now under the military rule, and because a civil war like situation in Manipur has also resulted in illegal immigration into India, particularly Rohingya refugees from the Rakhine state, right? So there are growing security concerns in these 3 different states, and apart from that, these security concerns in these 3 different states is linked to the influx of people from the neighboring countries, including both Myanmar and Bangladesh. So Rohingya refugees are coming, and Bangladesh immigrants are also illegally entering the northeastern part of India. That has resulted in the security concerns. And apart from that, in Manipur, we all knew that there is also an ethnic conflict between Kukis and Meiteis communities. So because of that reason, the center has decided to reimpose protected area permit. So we will understand what exactly is this protected area permit, right? So this measure requires a foreign nationals who are visiting the states, who are going to visit Manipur, Mizoram and Nagaland, any foreign national, right? So visiting these states, they should obtain protected area permits, or they are also known as PAPs. So they needs to obtain protected area permit, and only then they will be allowed to enter into these states. And in fact, the protected area permits have been introduced through a legislative sanction or a government order called Foreigners Protected Areas Order 1958. So this Foreigners Order 1958 protected areas mandated that if the central government thinks any area is facing the security concerns or security issues, then the central government, particularly Ministry of Home Affairs, can impose the protected area permit on those respective states to particularly limit the foreign nationals entering those respective states. Now we'll understand what is this protected area permit. As I have already told you that this protected area permit has been issued under Foreigners Protected Areas Order of 1958 Foreigners Protected Areas Order. And in fact, it is considered as a regulatory mechanism, right? So it is a regulatory mechanism, and this particularly controls entry of non-Indians. This particularly control entry of non-Indian citizens into the northeastern part of India. Okay, so because of security concerns, because of ethnically sensitive region, a volatile region, illegal immigration, and there's also a problem of insurgency in the northeastern part of India, right? So because of that reason, this protected area permit has been introduced in certain states of the northeastern part of India, so that would control the entry of non-Indian citizens into the northeastern areas. There are certain designated areas in India, primarily the northeastern regions, so that include the states like Manipur, Nagaland and Mizoram. So I hope you have understood this protected area permit that limit the entry of non-Indian citizens into these sensitive areas, and these are considered sensitive due to a lot of geopolitical concerns and also security issues and need for controlled tourism and migration. Because of all these reasons, these areas are considered as sensitive areas. As I've already told you, in northeast, one reason is insurgency, second reason is illegal immigration. Illegal immigration is also another major reason, and apart from illegal immigration, it is ethnically sensitive and all these reasons resulted in making it more and more volatile region. Okay, so in fact, Ministry of Home Affairs is the central authority which is responsible for issuing this protected area permit. So which ministry issues protected area permit? Ministry of Home Affairs issues this. So in addition, the state authorities of the concerned regions, whether it is Manipur, Nagaland, Mizoram or any other sensitive area under the Foreigners Order 1958, so such as state governments of northeastern states, they can also issue this protected area permits along with the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, what is the duration of this protected area permit? So a protected area permit is generally issued for a 10-day. However, it can be extended for an additional 7 days, right? So total it can be first issued for 10 days, but over a period of time it can also be issued extended for another 7 days, particularly for foreign nationals, depending on the specific situation and the requirement. Now, why protected area permit is being issued? Because of controlled tourism, migration, particularly illegal immigration and security concerns, geopolitical concerns. Because of all these reasons, non-Indian citizens will be issued this protected area permits by the Union Home Ministry and the concerned state government. So I hope you have understood this, and we'll proceed on to discuss the next topic. So the next topic is that, so recently the Supreme Court of India asked the Union government to frame a comprehensive policy for sacred groves. So this is what the Union government has asked the central government to do. So we'll understand what is a sacred grove, or what are sacred groves, and we'll also look into different sacred groves in different parts of India, and how this policy will benefit the indigenous communities, because sacred groves are patches of trees. They have religious importance, cultural importance, and in fact the indigenous people play a very important role in protection and conservation of these patches of forest because of their religious and cultural importance. So in this backdrop, we'll try to understand what is a sacred grove, right? So in a landmark judgment by the Supreme Court recently, the Supreme Court has been hearing applications dealing with the protection of sacred groves of Rajasthan. And in this backdrop, the Supreme Court has directed the union government, or asked the union government, to frame a comprehensive, nuanced policy for the protection and conservation and management and preservation of these sacred groves all across India, not just in Rajasthan, but all across India, because of their huge ecological importance, the contribution to the local biodiversity, and how it provides livelihoods for the local communities. And because of that reason, the Supreme Court has asked the union government to frame a comprehensive policy for the management and preservation of the sacred groves. And what is a sacred grove? I have already told you the definition. So sacred groves are patches of trees, a small patches of trees. They have the religious as well as cultural significance, and they play a very important role in the conservation of biodiversity. In biodiversity conservation, sacred groves play a very important role. So you may also knew about these sacred groves. For example, some people believe that neem tree is a sacred tree, right? So neem tree is a sacred tree, and some people believe that banyan tree is a sacred tree. So such groves, or such forest patches, are still existing because of their religious and cultural significance, and their huge contribution is being recognized across India. And that's why it is very important to protect, preserve and manage these sacred groves in a ecologically sustainable manner. And that's why the Supreme Court has asked the union government to frame a comprehensive policy on these sacred groves. We have understood the definition of sacred groves, so we'll also understand some legal framework with respect to the sacred groves as well. So the management of wildlife and its habitat is the primary responsibility of the state government. Okay, so it is the primary responsibility of the state government to look after the wildlife and habitat, right? So we all knew that in the year 1972, Parliament has passed Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Under Wildlife Protection Act, so different degrees of protection is being extended to different animals. So animals are being categorized under Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. So there were different schedule, and a degree of protection has also been extended to different animals as well. Now the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 actually empowers the respective state governments for declaration of any private or community land as a community reserve. Okay, so in fact it can declare any forest, a private or community land, as a community reserve, protecting fauna, flora, as well as traditional cultural conservation values and practices. Right, so this is what the Wildlife Conservation Act 1972 has been saying. And the legal protection of sacred groves, legal protection of the sacred groves can be derived from the Wildlife Protection Act if state governments declare those sacred grove patches as part of the community reserve. If state government declare that particular area as a community reserve, so they enjoy legal protection under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, because we all knew that the sacred groves have the cultural conservation values. It is related to religion, and it has religious values and also cultural values as well. And in fact, the Supreme Court has also emphasized on the need for a national policy, right? So it is very important that we need to identify all sacred groves all across India, and we need to conduct a comprehensive survey with respect to these sacred groves, and that would result in better data with respect to sacred groves, framing a better policy, and that policy aimed at protection and conservation of sacred groves. Okay, so the court has asked the union government that there is a need to frame a new national policy on the conservation of sacred groves, and court has particularly issued an instruction to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, right? So this is the nodal ministry for the environment, climate change, biodiversity, ecosystem conservation. So because of that reason, the court has instructed union government in general and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in particular to frame a national policy for the conservation and protection of these sacred groves. And apart from that, Supreme Court has also asked the ministry to conduct a nationwide survey to identify or even map these sacred groves, right? So there is a need to conduct a nationwide survey on the sacred groves, and in fact the court has also clearly asked the ministry and the union government to issue strict guidelines to prevent reduction of these sacred groves or degradation of the sacred groves due to denudation or deforestation. So deforestation is one of the major problem that forests across India have been facing, primarily because of the anthropogenic reasons. So however, indigenous communities protect these sacred groves because they consider these plants are sacred for them, because it is being associated with the religious and the cultural aspect of the indigenous communities, right? So displacement of indigenous communities will also result in the deforestation of the sacred groves. So this will be a measure of extending greater protection to the sacred groves, and that comes from the Supreme Court itself. So here a list of different sacred groves across different parts of India in different states. In Andhra Pradesh, they are being called as Pavitravana. Okay, so they're being called as Pavitravana, and in Arunachal Pradesh they are being called as Gumpa Forest, and in Goa they're called as Diorai Pan, and Jharkhand they are being called as Sarana. Okay, so these are different states along with the local term or local names for the sacred groves. You can go through this list as well, so that will help you get a better picture about the sacred groves. And in fact, the Supreme Court of India has also asked the union government, or it has highlighted the national forest policy. So we already have the national forest policy that was framed in the year 1988. So therefore the Supreme Court has highlighted the national forest policy of 1988. So this national forest policy 1988 also supports community-led initiatives to protect the forest patches, and even the court has encouraged formal recognition of sacred groves. Okay, so there should be a formal or legal recognition of sacred groves as a community reserves under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. So under Wildlife Protection Act 1972, who have the primary responsibility of designating forest as a community forest? So it is the state government which has the primary responsibility of designating any forest as a sacred forest. And even the court has also suggested recognizing and empowering traditional custodians. Who are the traditional custodians? The indigenous people who are living along with those sacred groves, because they consider those forest patches as sacred. So they take all the measures to protect and conserve those local ecosystems, and they even react strongly against any attempts of logging in those sacred forests. Okay, so the court suggested recognizing and empowering traditional custodians under the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006. Okay, so the Supreme Court has asked to recognize those indigenous traditional forest dwellers as part of the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act of 2006. Okay, so we all knew that Salman Khan was previously arrested in black buck poaching case, right? So in Rajasthan, there was a community called Bishnoi community. Okay, so Bishnoi community very closely associate itself with the nature and animals as well, right? So one gang leader, Lawrence Bishnoi, has been threatening Salman Khan because a Bishnoi community considers black buck and other nature as sacred for them, right? So it is sacred for them, and anyone who hunt, anyone who do poaching, so it hurts their religious sentiments, it hurts their cultural sentiments, right? So this is how the indigenous people protect the nature, protect these sacred groves, right? So I hope you get an idea about this. And these communities can even regulate harmful activities, ensuring sustainable conservation. And the Supreme Court has been hearing particularly about a sacred grove's success story in Rajasthan's Piplantri village. So in Rajasthan's Piplantri village, what generally happens is that, in this particular village of Rajasthan, community efforts have transformed the barren land into a thriving grove. So we all knew that in Rajasthan, a majority portion of the Rajasthan is dry land, arid and semi-arid region. But in Piplantri village, community efforts have led to the barren land into thriving forests. And even there were initiatives being practiced, followed by the people of Piplantri village, residents of Piplantri village, such as planting 111 trees for every girl child born in that particular village. And that has resulted in sustainable livelihoods of the people in Piplantri village, and it has also reduced the female ferticide as well. And this is of course a success story because it has converted the barren land into a thriving grove, and it has also arrested the female ferticide, and it has also resulted in the livelihood improvement of the people in the Piplantri village. And because of that reason, it is a success story. On the same lines, there is a need to protect the sacred groves as well, because they have been facing a lot of threats. And apart from that, the indigenous people are the custodians of the sacred groves, so therefore they should also be recognized under Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act of 2006. And in fact, Union government traditionally viewed wildlife conservation, habitat management, conservation of forests as a state's responsibility. However, the recent Supreme Court's directive to Union government and the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change aligned the sacred groves, which have cultural and traditional rights of communities, urging the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change to take the lead. So it should not just be the responsibility of the state government, even union government should also take active steps to protect and conserve these forest areas. Right, so underwater hot springs in the Indian Ocean, so that is a new that is in news in the Indian Express. So recently in the Indian Ocean, in fact, Indian government and Indian research vessels have been searching for the minerals. We have been exploring the possibility to extract minerals from the Indian Ocean seabed. Right, so I hope all of you knew about this, and in fact we also planning to launch a Samudrayan mission into the Indian Ocean, because Indian Ocean bed has polymetallic nodules, and these polymetallic nodules have a very important minerals. And since we have been facing the crunch of minerals, and since we have dependent on other countries for essential minerals, so it is very important for us to extract those essential minerals from the Indian Ocean seabed. So therefore we could reduce our dependence on other countries. We could also become self-reliant in mineral production. As part of the exploration of minerals in the Indian Ocean, recently Indian research team has identified a underwater hot spring in the Indian Ocean. So that we will be going to understand, right? So Indian oceanographers have achieved a historic feat, right? So they have achieved a historic feat by capturing the image of an hydrothermal vent located 4,500 meters below the Indian Ocean. So they have captured the image of this hydrothermal vent, and we'll understand why this hydrothermal vent is very, very important, right? So this discovery of hydrothermal vent and the image of the hydrothermal vent, so it was made under the Ministry of Earth Sciences, and that will be the nodal ministry for the exploration of minerals in the Indian Ocean. And it is part of a 4,000 crore deep ocean mission Samudrayan, and that holds immense potential for the mineral exploration in the Indian Ocean. We'll understand what is a deep sea mission, or this is also known as Samudrayan. And the deep ocean mission is a program aimed to explore the deep ocean and also develop technologies to use the resources which are being extracted from the Indian Ocean bed. And in fact, deep ocean mission is also a mission mode project, and this project support India's blue economy initiatives with the Ministry of Earth Sciences. And in fact, the Ministry of Earth Sciences will serve as the nodal ministry, and that will coordinate with the multi-institutional effort, or there are multiple institutions which are being involved in the exploration and exploitation of minerals from the Indian Ocean seabed. So therefore Ministry of Earth Sciences will play the role of collaborating and coordinating among all these different institutions which are involved in this deep ocean mission. And apart from that, it also aims to develop technologies to use ocean's living and non-living resources, and also improve understanding of the ocean's role in the climate change. Now, what are these hydrothermal vents? So it is important for us to understand hydrothermal vents as well. Now, hydrothermal vents are generally the underwater springs. So underwater springs in the sense that generally whenever a volcanic eruption takes place, magma and lava comes out of the volcanic eruption, so it is very hot. So such eruptions also takes place in ocean bed as well. So they are known as hydrothermal vent. Okay, so they are known as hydrothermal vents. So they are underwater springs. They found near the tectonic plate boundaries. And in fact, they also occur when cold water at the seabed around 2 degrees Celsius interacts with magma in tectonically active regions up to 370 degrees Celsius, right? So this is the condition where the hydrothermal vents would originate, and the super hot water emerges as plumes, and the hot water consists of, or it is rich in minerals and gases through vent chimneys and fissures. So it also very often consisting of rich minerals and gases as well. So what is the significance of these hydrothermal vents? So hydrothermal vents are significant because of their deposits of valuable minerals and metals. So there are some valuable minerals so that we could found in these hydrothermal vents, including copper, zinc, gold, silver, platinum, iron, cobalt and nickel. So all these different minerals and metals can be extracted from the hydrothermal vents, and that is the significant aspect of it. However, apart from it, it also has some biological importance, right? So it provides some biological insights as well. So hydrothermal vents generally support unique ecosystem. Now, how they support unique ecosystem? So through these hydrothermal vents, there are a certain different type of organisms called chemosynthetic organisms. So these chemosynthetic organisms thrive by utilizing chemicals. These chemicals are enriched with minerals and metals. Similar to how plants use sunlight for photosynthesis, these chemosynthetic organisms also use the minerals and metals that are being extracted, that is being emitted or emerged out of these hydrothermal vents. So a definition of these chemosynthetic organisms has been given. So chemosynthetic organisms are organisms that use chemical reactions to create food rather than sunlight, and include bacteria and archaea as well, right? So these are known as chemosynthetic organisms. However, what is the significance of this discovery? So this discovery will boost India's deep ocean mission, especially the Samudrayan initiative, like how we are planning to launch a space mission called Chandrayaan. We have already launched Gaganyaan. So this will be the Samudrayan initiative, and that will focus on the mineral exploration. And apart from that, these findings also confirm the earlier surveys which have been conducted by different agencies, and it also opens new opportunities for understanding deep sea ecosystem as well as the resource potential as well. Okay, so this is about the hydrothermal vents that are being recently identified in the Indian Ocean seabed, and these hydrothermal vents are very important because it gives us some important insights about the key elements or key minerals, and apart from that, it also holds some biological insights as well. So however, today we have one important mains practice question. So the mains practice question is because recently Sri Lankan president, so Anura Kumara Dissanayake, paid an official visit to India. In fact, after he became the president of Sri Lanka, his India's visit was the first visit, right? So first external visit to any state, and in this context it is very important for us to understand and discuss India-Sri Lanka relations in a very detailed manner. So therefore there is a question, the question is, India and Sri Lanka must collaboratively to strengthen their ties and realize their shared objectives of development and prosperity. Comment, right? So that is the question. India and Sri Lanka so must collaborate to further strengthen their ties, and also also they should realize their shared objectives of development and prosperity as a close neighbors, right? So Sri Lanka is very close neighbor to India across sea. Now in this context, it is very important that we need to understand India-Sri Lanka relations. So in the introduction, so the context, I'll be giving you the context first, and then we'll discuss the structure of the answer. So Sri Lankan President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, on his first bilateral visit to India, he assured Prime Minister Narendra Modi that Sri Lankan territory will not be used in any way that would be detrimental to Indian interests. So he assured Prime Minister Narendra Modi on his visit to Sri Lanka. And in fact, both Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Sri Lankan President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, they have emphasized on strengthening cooperation in areas like defense, economic development and regional security. Okay, so I hope you have understood the context. Now we'll try to discuss the structure of the answer. Now in the introduction, you just briefly give a brief introduction about India-Sri Lanka relations, India-Sri Lanka ties, because India-Sri Lanka ties are centuries old ties, right? So because we have been culturally connected with Ramayana, with Buddhism, and in fact Imperial Cholas also ruled over Sri Lanka. Because of all these reasons, we are culturally very close and connected. So you could give that, you could write that in the introduction. So the relationship between India and Sri Lanka is more than 2500 year old, right? So more than 2500 year old, and both India and Sri Lanka have the legacy of intellectual, cultural, religious and linguistic interaction, right? A lot of Buddhist scholars from Sri Lanka come to India, and Buddhist scholars from India to Sri Lanka. So Buddhist scholars from India also visited Sri Lanka, and religious significance because of Ramayana, because of Buddhism, and we also share common culture and intellectual legacy also defining India-Sri Lanka relations since 2500 year old. However, in recent times, the relationship has been marked by a close contact at all different levels, right? And in fact, trade, commerce, investment have also grown, and there is a cooperation, a multifaceted cooperation in different fields, whether it is education, science and technology, and cultural cooperation, defense, security. In all these different areas, there is a multifaceted cooperation between India and Sri Lanka, and both countries also share a broad understanding of major issues of international interest. So whatever issues which are international interest, so both countries have common understanding about those international issues. Now, what are the areas of cooperation between India and Sri Lanka? Now, next you need to write this heading, and after this heading you just highlight this heading like this, and you can write areas of India Sri Lanka cooperation. So you can also draw a diagram, right? So India and Sri Lanka, right? So Sri Lanka is a member of BIMSTEC, that is Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral, Technical and Economic Cooperation, and Sri Lanka is a member of both BIMSTEC as well as South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation as well. And in fact, in these two organizations, India has been playing a very important role. So although SAARC is largely dysfunctional as of now because of the bilateral issues between different countries, but BIMSTEC is been planning to explore the potential among all the South and Southeast Asian countries, right? So because in BIMSTEC, Myanmar and Thailand are also the member countries, and in fact India's close engagement with most of its neighbors, including Sri Lanka, is part of its India's neighborhood first policy, and also its Sagar policy, security and growth for all in the region policy. And when we talk about the trade relations between India and Sri Lanka, the main framework which has been governing trade between India and Sri Lanka is India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, or ISFTA. And India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement was signed way back in the year 1998, and it entered into force in March 2000. Right, so in March 2000 it entered into force, and that has been governing the bilateral trade between India and Sri Lanka. And even Sri Lanka is one of India's largest trading partners among all the SAARC countries, right? So we all knew that there are a number of countries which are being part of SAARC. So I hope you knew about all the member countries. There's no need to discuss those member countries, but among all the SAARC member countries, Sri Lanka is one of India's largest trading partners, and India in turn is Sri Lanka's large trade partner globally. And cultural and educational relations between India and Sri Lanka. So if you look at this dimension, India has established Indian Cultural Center in the capital Colombo, and this India Cultural Center actively promotes awareness about Indian culture, and it also offers classes about Indian culture, particularly in the domains of music, dance, Hindi and yoga. And India and Sri Lanka have commemorated 2600th year of attainment of enlightenment by Lord Buddha. So we all knew that Ashoka has made a remarkable remarkable efforts when it comes to preaching Buddha's ideals, Buddha's Dhamma in Sri Lanka. Ashoka personally sent his son and daughter to Sri Lanka. So therefore India and Sri Lanka have commemorated this legacy, this 2600th year of attainment of enlightenment by Lord Buddha. And defense and security cooperation between India and Sri Lanka. So when we talk about the defense and security cooperation, India Sri Lanka conducts joint military exercise called Mitra Shakti and joint naval exercise called Slynex, right? So they conduct joint naval exercise as well as joint military exercise as well. And even between India, Sri Lanka and Maldives, there is a trilateral maritime security cooperation agreement as well, right? So there is a trilateral maritime security cooperation agreement between these three different countries, and this maritime security cooperation agreement specifically focuses on surveillance, anti-piracy operations, and even reducing maritime pollution in the Indian Ocean region, because these countries are part of Indian Ocean littoral. And in April 2019, India and Sri Lanka have also concluded agreement on countering drug trafficking as well as human trafficking, and that is one of the major area of concern for both of these countries. However, the relationship between India and Sri Lanka is not free from the challenges. There are certain challenges between India and Sri Lanka and their relations. One main issue between India and Sri Lanka is China. Okay, so China has extended billions of dollars of loans to Sri Lankan government, right? So in return, China has already acquired the Hambantota port at a strategic location very close to India, and that poses a strategic depth issues for India in the Indian Ocean. So in recent times, the presence of Chinese Navy has also substantially increased in the Indian Ocean, and particularly its string of pearls policy. China has been planning to circle India, or China has been planning to contain India within this particular South Asian region. And Sri Lanka has also handed over the strategic port of Hambantota, and this port has been handed over to Sri Lanka for 99-year lease. Okay, so 99-year lease, so it has been given to Sri Lanka. And in fact, this Hambantota port plays a very important role in China's infrastructure project called Belt and Road Initiative. And in fact, China's research vessel also very often coming into the Indian Ocean, and it is recently docked in the Sri Lankan coast as well. And in fact, both India and Sri Lanka have signed a civil nuclear cooperation agreement, and in fact, Sri Lanka's first nuclear partnership with any country, right? The civil nuclear cooperation agreement with India. And even to counter BRI in Sri Lanka and counter Chinese infrastructure investments in Sri Lanka, India is also planning to build Trincomalee port to counter Chinese developments at the Hambantota port. Now, what are the measures that are required to strengthen the bilateral ties between India and Sri Lanka? So you could also write certain measures as well as a way forward. So a fisherman issue is a cause of concern between India and Sri Lanka. So thereby there should be a permanent solution that needs to be worked out by both India and Sri Lanka to address this fisherman issue through bilateral engagements. Secondly, both India and Sri Lanka should sign a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, so that could redefine the trade relations between India and Sri Lanka, and that could also further improve economic trade, commerce relations, and that could also result in a big boost to the economic relationship of these two countries. And India should focus more on traditional and cultural ties to improve its relations with Sri Lanka, particularly focusing on the people to people ties as well, right? So that's how you can write a way forward on India Sri Lanka relations. So that would be sufficient. Okay, so that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, so please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. So thank you.